It was a Tuesday morning in September 1982, and Linda was rushing around her small kitchen like she did every other day. The coffee maker was making those familiar bubbling sounds, and she could hear her two little girls giggling in the next room. At 32 years old, Linda had gotten pretty good at this single mom thing, even though some days felt like she was barely keeping her head above water. Her daughters, Katie and Amy, were the light of her world. Katie was 8 years old with bright, blonde hair that always seemed to have a mind of its own no matter how much Linda tried to brush it down. Amy was 6, and she followed her big sister everywhere like a little shadow. They were both wearing their favorite matching pink t-shirts that morning, the ones Linda had bought them at the discount store last month as a special treat. "Mom, can we have pancakes?" Katie called from the living room, where she was trying to tie Amy's shoelaces. "Not today, sweetheart," Linda called back, spreading peanut butter on 2 slices of bread. "We're running late, and I need to get to work early today." Linda worked at Murphy's Diner on Main Street, and Tuesday mornings were always busy with the breakfast crowd. She had been working there for 3 years now, ever since her husband left. The pay wasn't much, but the tips helped, and her boss understood when she needed to leave early for school events or when one of the girls got sick. The girls ate their sandwiches quietly while Linda packed their lunchboxes. She could see them, whispering to each other about something, probably planning another one of their little adventures. These two were always up to something together. "What are you two plotting now?" Linda asked with a smile, knowing that look they got when they were cooking up some kind of plan. "Nothing, Mom," Amy said quickly, but her grin gave her away. Katie elbowed her little sister gently. "We were just talking about that new cartoon that comes on after school, the one with the talking animals." Linda nodded, not really listening. She was looking at the clock and calculating how long it would take to drop them off at school and still make it to work on time. The morning rush was always crazy, and she couldn't afford to be late again. After dropping the girls off at Riverside Elementary, Linda spent the morning serving coffee and eggs to the usual crowd of construction workers and office people. The diner was loud and busy, just the way she liked it. When she was busy, she didn't have time to worry about things like the electric bill or whether she had enough money for new school clothes. Around lunchtime, things started to slow down. Linda was wiping down tables when Mrs. Patterson, an elderly lady who lived next door to them, came rushing through the door looking worried. "Linda, honey, are you supposed to pick up the girls today?" Mrs. Patterson asked, a little out of breath. Linda looked up, confused. "No, they always walk home from school. Why?" "Well, I saw them about an hour ago walking down Maple Street, but they were going the wrong direction. Away from home instead of toward it." Linda felt a little flutter of worry in her stomach, but she tried to stay calm. Katie and Amy were good kids, and they knew the rules about coming straight home after school. Maybe they had stopped by a friend's house. "They probably went to play with the Johnson kids," Linda said, more to convince herself than Mrs. Patterson. You know how children are, but when Linda got home at 4:30 that afternoon, the house was empty. No backpacks by the door, no cartoon sounds coming from the television, no sound of little feet running around upstairs. The silence felt strange and heavy. She walked through the house calling their names, even checking under beds and in closets, places where they sometimes liked to hide when they were playing games. Nothing. Linda tried not to panic. She called the Johnson house, but Mrs. Johnson said she hadn't seen the girls all day. She called 3 other neighbors, but nobody had seen Katie and Amy since school let out. By 5:30, Linda was really starting to worry. She got in her old blue car and drove slowly through the neighborhood, looking down every street and checking the playground at the park. She stopped at the corner store where the girls sometimes bought candy with their allowance money. "Have you seen my daughters today?" she asked Mr. Wong, the store owner. She showed him the school pictures she always carried in her wallet. Mr. Wong looked at the photos carefully and shook his head. "No, I haven't seen these girls today. Are they missing?" The word missing hit Linda like a punch to the stomach. Missing. That was a word that happened to other people's children, not hers. She drove home as fast as she could and called the police. Her hands were shaking as she dialed the number. "Riverside. Police Department, how can I help you?" "My daughters didn't come home from school today," Linda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've looked everywhere, and nobody has seen them since this morning. The dispatcher asked her some questions about the girls' ages, what they were wearing, and when she had seen them last. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers were at her door. Officer Martinez was young and had kind eyes. Officer Brooks was older and had the tired look of someone who had seen too much. They sat at Linda's kitchen table and asked her to tell them everything about that morning and about her daughters. "Katie is very responsible," Linda explained. "She always looks after her little sister. They know they're supposed to come straight home after school. This isn't like them at all." Officer Martinez took notes while Officer Brooks looked around the house. "Have they ever wandered off before?" he asked. "Never," Linda said firmly. "The farthest they go is to the park, and that's only when I'm with them." As the evening got darker, more police officers arrived. They brought flashlights and started searching the neighborhood. Linda could see the beams of light moving through her neighbors' yards and hear the officers calling Katie and Amy's names. By 10 o'clock that night, half the town seemed to be involved in the search. Teachers from the girls' school showed up to help. Neighbors Linda barely knew were walking through the woods behind their house with flashlights. The local fire department brought search dogs. Linda stood in her front yard watching all these people looking for her children and felt completely helpless. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen in small towns like Riverside. Children didn't just disappear. Mrs. Patterson brought her a cup of coffee and put an arm around her shoulders. "We're going to find them, honey," she said quietly. "They're probably just lost somewhere and scared to call for help." But as the hours passed and the searchers came back empty-handed, Linda felt a cold fear settling in her chest. This wasn't just 2 little girls getting lost on their way home from school. Something was very wrong. The police set up a command post in the community center, and by morning Katie and Amy's pictures were on the local news. Linda sat in front of the television, staring at her daughters' smiling faces on the screen, and couldn't believe this was real. "If anyone has seen these 2 girls," the news reporter was saying, "please contact the Riverside Police Department immediately." Linda looked at the phone, willing it to ring with good news. She kept thinking they would walk through the front door any minute, full of stories about some big adventure they had been on. But the door stayed closed, and the phone stayed silent, and that's how Linda's nightmare began, on a Tuesday in September 1982, when 2 little girls in matching pink shirts walked out of their elementary school and vanished without a trace. 3 weeks after Katie and Amy disappeared, Linda quit her job at Murphy's Diner. She couldn't concentrate on taking orders or pouring coffee when her mind was constantly thinking about her daughters. Every time the bell above the diner door rang, she would look up hoping to see 2 little girls walking in, but it was always just another customer wanting breakfast. "I understand," her boss, Mr. Murphy, said when she told him, "Take all the time you need, your job will be here when you're ready." But Linda knew she wouldn't be ready anytime soon. How could she go back to normal life when her children were out there somewhere, possibly scared and alone? The first few months were the hardest. Every morning, Linda would wake up for just a split second thinking everything was normal. Then reality would hit her like a cold wave. The house was too quiet. No little feet running down the hallway. No arguments about who got to use the bathroom first. No requests for cereal or help finding matching socks. Detective Johnson had taken over the case from the uniformed officers. He was a patient man in his 40s who had children of his own. He came by Linda's house every few days to update her on the investigation, even when there wasn't much to report. "We're following every lead," he would tell her, sitting at the same kitchen table where Katie and Amy used to eat their breakfast. No matter how small or unlikely it seems. And there were leads, lots of them. The problem was that none of them led anywhere. A truck driver called from 3 states away saying he had seen 2 girls at a rest stop who looked like Katie and Amy. Linda drove 8 hours to get there, her heart pounding with hope the entire way. But when she arrived and looked at the security camera footage, it was clearly 2 different children with their parents. A teacher in Florida called the police station after seeing the girls' pictures on a missing children website. She was sure she had seen them at a beach with a woman who didn't look like their mother. Linda flew to Florida on money she borrowed from her sister. She spent 3 days walking up and down that beach, showing Katie and Amy's photos to everyone she met. Nobody recognized them. The worst call came on a rainy Thursday in November. A woman from Oregon said she had found 2 children living with a family under different names. The descriptions matched perfectly: blonde hair, blue eyes, about the right ages. Linda's hands shook as she booked a flight to Portland. She spent her life savings on that trip. She rented a car and drove to the address the woman had given her. When she knocked on the door, a confused mother answered with 2 children hiding behind her legs. They had blonde hair and blue eyes, but they weren't Katie and Amy. They weren't even close. Linda sat in that rental car outside the stranger's house and cried harder than she had since the day her daughters disappeared. She had been so sure, this time. So certain that she was finally going to hold her babies again. Back home in Riverside, well-meaning neighbors and friends started to worry about Linda. She had lost weight and wasn't taking care of herself. Her sister Rose tried to get her to eat regular meals and sleep at normal hours, but Linda couldn't focus on things like that. "You need to take care of yourself," Rose would say. "Katie and Amy need their mother to be strong when they come home." When they come home, not if. Linda held on to that hope like it was the only thing keeping her alive. Detective Johnson kept working the case even as other officers moved on to newer investigations. He had Katie and Amy's school pictures taped to his computer monitor. Every few weeks, he would call Linda with updates on tips that had come in or new areas they had searched. "We're not giving up," he would always tell her. "As long as there's a chance they're out there, we'll keep looking." Linda's house became a headquarters for the search effort. She had maps spread across her dining room table with red pins marking every place someone thought they had seen the girls. She had notebooks full of phone numbers and addresses of people who had called with tips. The girls' bedroom remained exactly as they had left it that Tuesday morning, with clothes scattered on the floor and stuffed animals on their beds. People in town started to whisper. Linda could see it in their eyes when she went to the grocery store or the post office. They felt sorry for her, but they also thought she was losing her grip on reality. How long could someone keep searching for children who might never be found? The hardest part was holidays. The first Christmas without Katie and Amy nearly broke Linda completely. She had always made such a big deal about Christmas morning, staying up late to wrap presents and make special pancakes shaped like Christmas trees. That December, she couldn't even bring herself to put up a tree. Rose came over on Christmas morning and found Linda sitting on the couch in her pajamas, staring at the wrapped presents she had bought for the girls before they disappeared. "Linda, honey, you can't live like this," Rose said gently. "It's been over a year now." "They're going to come home," Linda said quietly. "And when they do, I want everything to be ready for them." By the second year, the phone calls from strangers had slowed to a trickle. The leads were fewer and farther between. Detective Johnson still checked in regularly, but Linda could see the tired sadness in his eyes. He was losing hope too, even though he tried not to show it. Linda started driving to different towns on weekends just to walk around and look for her daughters. She would go to playgrounds and shopping centers, anywhere children might be. She carried their most recent school photos in her purse and would show them to anyone who would look. "Have you seen these girls?" she would ask store clerks and park supervisors and random mothers at playgrounds. Most people were kind and would study the photos carefully before shaking their heads. Some would pat her arm sympathetically and say they would keep an eye out. But as the months turned into years, Linda could see that people were getting uncomfortable when she approached them. She was becoming that woman, the one everyone felt sorry for but also wanted to avoid, the mother who couldn't accept that her children were gone. Linda's savings account emptied completely. She had spent everything on flights and gas money and hotel rooms, chasing leads that never panned out. Rose offered to help with money, but Linda was too proud to take much. She got a part-time job at the post office, sorting mail in the back room where she didn't have to interact with many people. The work was mindless, which was both good and bad. Good because she could do it without thinking. Bad because it gave her too much time to think about Katie and Amy. She would wonder if they remembered her, if they were happy wherever they were, if they knew how hard she was trying to find them. 5 years after the girls disappeared, Detective Johnson retired. The new detective assigned to the case was younger and had never met Katie and Amy. He was polite when Linda called, but she could tell he saw their disappearance as just another old, cold case that would probably never be solved. Linda refused to give up, but she had to change her approach. She couldn't afford to travel anymore, and she was running out of leads to follow. She started focusing on the internet, joining online groups for families of missing children and posting Katie and Amy's photos on every website that would accept them. She learned to use a computer at the public library, staying there for hours at a time, searching through databases and message boards for any mention of her daughters. It was a new kind of hope, but it was still hope. 8 years passed, then 10. Linda's hair started turning gray, and lines appeared around her eyes from years of worry and sleepless nights. But every morning she still woke up thinking about Katie and Amy, still wondering if today would be the day she finally found them. The people in Riverside had gotten used to seeing Linda walking around town with her photos, asking the same questions she had been asking for a decade. Some thought she was crazy, others admired her determination, but everyone knew her story, and everyone secretly hoped that someday, somehow, those 2 little girls would come home. By the 10th year after Katie and Amy disappeared, Linda had hit rock bottom. She was sitting at her kitchen table on a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week her daughters had vanished, staring at a pile of unpaid bills. The electricity company had sent a final notice. The bank was threatening to take her house. Her part-time job at the post office barely covered food, let alone all her expenses. Her sister Rose had been calling every day, worried sick about her. Linda had stopped answering the phone most of the time. What was the point? Every conversation was the same. Rose would ask how she was doing, Linda would say she was fine, and then Rose would gently suggest that maybe it was time to move forward with her life. Move forward. As if she could just leave Katie and Amy behind and pretend they had never existed. Linda was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't hear the gentle knock on her front door. When she opened it, she found Mrs. Garcia from across the street, standing there with a covered dish and a concerned smile. "I brought you some soup," Mrs. Garcia said. "My grandmother's recipe. It always made me feel better when I was going through hard times." Linda wanted to say she wasn't hungry, but Mrs. Garcia had already stepped inside and was heading toward the kitchen. She was a small woman in her 60s with kind eyes and graying hair that she always kept perfectly styled. "You know," Mrs. Garcia said as she served the soup into 2 bowls, "I've been watching you all these years and I think you're the strongest person I've ever met." Linda almost laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "Strong? I can barely get out of bed most mornings." "That's exactly what makes you strong," Mrs. Garcia said, sitting down across from her. "You get up anyway, every single day for 10 years. You've gotten up and kept going. That takes incredible strength." They ate soup in comfortable silence for a while. Linda had to admit it tasted amazing, warm and comforting in a way she hadn't felt in years. "Linda," Mrs. Garcia said carefully, "have you ever thought about coming to church with me?" Linda's first instinct was to say no. She had never been particularly religious, and after what happened to Katie and Amy, she wasn't sure she believed in a God who would let children disappear. "I know what you're thinking," Mrs. Garcia continued. "Trust me, I've been angry at God plenty of times in my life. When my husband died, when my son was in that car accident, when my mother got sick. But I learned something important. Being angry at God doesn't mean he stops loving you." Linda looked down at her soup. "I don't know if I can sit in a room full of people and pretend everything is okay." "Nobody's asking you to pretend anything," Mrs. Garcia said gently. "Come as you are. Broken, angry, tired, whatever you're feeling. God can handle it." The following Sunday, Linda found herself getting dressed for church for the first time in over a decade. She chose a simple blue dress that used to be one of Katie's favorites. "You look so pretty in blue, Mommy," Katie used to say. Grace Community. Church was smaller than Linda had expected. Maybe 50 people scattered across wooden pews, singing hymns she remembered from her childhood. Pastor Williams was a tall, thin man with a warm smile, who welcomed her without making a big fuss about Linda sat in the back row, ready to leave if she felt overwhelmed. But something about the quiet atmosphere and the familiar songs made her feel, not happy exactly, but peaceful in a way she hadn't experienced in years. After the service, several people introduced themselves to Linda. They were friendly but not pushy, and nobody asked her about her daughters or why she had decided to start coming to church. It was refreshing to have conversations that weren't about her tragedy. Pastor Williams shook her hand at the door. "I hope you'll come back next week," he said. "And if you ever need someone to talk to, my door is always open." Linda did come, back the next week. And the week after that. She started sitting a little closer to the front each time, and she began to recognize the regular members of the congregation. There was Betty, an elderly widow who always wore bright purple. There was Tom, a construction worker who came straight from job sites with paint still on his hands. There was the Johnson family with their 3 young children, who reminded Linda painfully of her own family, but in a bittersweet rather than devastating way. After a month of regular attendance, Pastor Williams approached Linda about joining a small support group that met on Wednesday evenings. It was for people who had experienced loss or trauma, and Linda was hesitant at first. "I don't know if I'm ready to talk about things," she told him. "You don't have to talk until you want to," he assured her. "Sometimes just listening to other people's stories helps us process our own." The support group met in a small room behind the church sanctuary. There were 8 people in the group, ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. Linda learned that grief came in many forms. There was Carol, whose adult son had died in military service. There was David, who had lost his job and his house in the same month. There was Margaret, whose husband had left her after 30 years of marriage. For the first few meetings, Linda just listened. She heard stories of loss and recovery, of anger and acceptance, of finding hope in the darkest moments. Slowly, she began to realize that she wasn't alone in her pain. One Wednesday evening, about 2 months after she started attending, Linda finally spoke up. "My daughters disappeared 11 years ago," she said quietly. "Katie was 8 and Amy was 6. I've spent every day since then looking for them, and I'm starting to wonder if I've wasted my whole life chasing shadows." The room was silent for a moment, and then Carol reached over and squeezed Linda's hand. "You haven't wasted anything," Carol said firmly. "Love is never wasted, even when it hurts." As the months went by, Linda found herself looking forward to Sundays and Wednesday evenings. Church gave her a sense of community she hadn't realized she was missing. For the first time in years, she had conversations about things other than her missing daughters, about books, about movies, about the weather, about normal, everyday life. She started volunteering to help with church events. She organized the monthly potluck dinners and helped decorate for holidays. It felt good to be useful, to contribute something positive to other people's lives. Pastor Williams offered her a part-time job helping with the church office work. The pay wasn't much, but it was enough to help her catch up on some bills, and it gave her a sense of purpose beyond the endless search for Katie and Amy. Linda still thought about her daughters every day. She still kept their photos in her purse and their bedroom exactly as they had left it. But for the first time in 11 years, she also had moments, sometimes whole hours, when she thought about other things. She could laugh at Tom's construction site stories or get excited about Betty's grandchildren visiting from out of state. One Sunday, as she sat in what had become her regular pew, 3rd row from the front on the right side, Linda realized something important had changed. She still hoped and prayed for Katie and Amy's return, but she was no longer consumed by that hope. She had learned to live with uncertainty, to find joy in small moments, to trust that somehow everything would work out the way it was supposed to. The Bible she reached for every Sunday was worn and familiar now. She had read through it twice since joining the church, finding comfort in passages about faith, hope, and God's plan for people's lives. She especially loved Psalm 23, which talked about walking through the valley of the shadow of death and fearing no evil. Linda had been walking through her own valley for 11 years now. But finally, with the help of her church family and her growing faith, she was beginning to see light on the other side. It was October 15, 2003. Exactly 21 years and 1 month since Katie and Amy had disappeared. Linda woke up that Sunday morning with a strange feeling in her chest. Not anxiety or sadness like usual, but something different. Something that felt almost like anticipation, though she couldn't explain why. She had been attending Grace Community Church for over a year now, and Sundays had become her favorite day of the week. She looked forward to seeing her church family, to singing the familiar hymns, and to the peaceful feeling that always washed over her during Pastor Williams's sermons. As she got dressed that morning, Linda chose the same blue dress she had worn to her very first church service. It had become her Sunday dress, and wearing it always reminded her of how far she had come. A year ago, she could barely get out of bed. Now she had purpose, community, and something that felt like hope for the future, even if that future looked different than she had once imagined. The October air was crisp and cool as Linda walked the 6 blocks to church. The leaves were starting to change colors, painting the trees in brilliant shades of red and gold. It was the kind of morning that made her grateful to be alive, despite everything she had been through. When she arrived at Grace Community Church, Linda noticed there was more activity than usual in the parking lot. Several families were unloading suitcases and boxes from their cars, and Pastor Williams was helping them carry things inside. "Good morning, Linda," Pastor Williams called out with his usual warm smile. "Perfect timing. I'd like you to meet the Robertson family. They just moved here from California and will be joining our congregation." Linda looked over at the family Pastor Williams was introducing. There was a man who appeared to be in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. Beside him stood a woman about the same age with shoulder-length brown hair and a nervous smile. But it was the 2 young women with them that made Linda's breath catch in her throat. The older girl looked to be about 19 or 20. She had long blonde hair and bright blue eyes that seemed familiar, though Linda couldn't place why. The younger one appeared to be 17 or 18, with strawberry blonde hair that caught the morning sunlight in a way that made Linda's heart skip a beat. "This is Linda," Pastor Williams was saying. "She's been such a blessing to our church. Linda, meet Robert and Helen Robertson, and their daughters Jessica and Anna." Linda shook hands with the parents, trying to focus on being polite and welcoming. But her eyes kept drifting back to the 2 girls. There was something about them that she couldn't shake. The way Jessica tilted her head when she listened. The way Anna had a small dimple in her chin that showed when she smiled. "It's so nice to meet you," Helen Robertson said. "We're excited to be part of the community here." "How long have you lived in California?" Linda asked, still trying to figure out why these girls seemed so familiar. "Oh, we've been there for about 20 years, Robert replied, "since the girls were very small. But Helen's mother lives here now, and we wanted to be closer to family." Something about the way Helen looked down when her husband mentioned how long they had been in California made Linda pay closer attention. There was nervousness in her voice, and she seemed eager to change the subject. "We should get inside," Helen said quickly. "We don't want to be late for the service." Linda followed the Robertson family into the church, but she found it hard to concentrate on anything Pastor Williams was saying during the service. She kept glancing over at Jessica and Anna, trying to figure out what it was about them that felt so significant. During the hymns, Linda noticed that neither girl seemed to know the words, even to the most common songs that most people learned as children. They looked around awkwardly, clearly unfamiliar with the church routine. This struck Linda as odd for a family that claimed to be regular churchgoers. When it came time for Pastor Williams to ask if there were any prayer requests, Linda found herself raising her hand. "I'd like to pray for families who have been separated," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "For children who are lost and parents who are searching. And for the truth to come to light when it's meant to." She wasn't sure why she had said that last part, but something inside her felt compelled to speak those words. As she said them, she noticed Helen Robertson shift uncomfortably in her seat and glanced nervously at her husband. After the service, Linda made her way to her usual spot near the front of the church where she'd like to spend a few quiet minutes before heading home. She reached for the worn Bible that was always kept in the pew, the same one she had been reading from for over a year. As she opened the Bible to Psalm 23, her favorite passage, Something small and white fluttered out from between the pages. Linda bent down to pick it up, thinking it was probably just a piece of paper someone had used as a bookmark. But when she unfolded the small piece of paper, her entire world stopped. Written in careful, childish handwriting were the words, "Katie, Thompson, age 8. If found, please call my mommy at 555-0147. Linda's hands began to shake so violently that she almost dropped the paper. She recognized that handwriting immediately. She had helped Katie practice writing her letters every night at the kitchen table. She had watched her daughter carefully form each letter, tongue poking out in concentration as she tried to make her writing as neat as possible. The phone number was their old number from 1982, the one they had before Linda moved to a smaller apartment after losing her job to search for the girls. Linda looked around the church frantically. How had this paper gotten into this Bible? She had been reading from this same Bible for over a year, and she had never seen this piece of paper before. It was impossible. It didn't make any sense. Her eyes found the Robertson family, who were talking quietly near the back of the church. Jessica was standing with her back to Linda, but when she turned to say something to her mother, Linda saw it clearly for the first time. The small cleft in Jessica's chin. The exact same cleft that Katie had as a child. Linda's legs felt weak, and she had to sit down hard on the pew. Her mind was racing, trying to process what she was seeing. She looked down at the paper in her hands again, then back at the two girls who were now walking toward the church exit with their parents. Anna turned around once to look back into the church, and for just a moment, her eyes met Linda's. There was something in that look, a flash of recognition, maybe, or confusion, that made Linda's heart pound even harder. Linda watched as the Robertson family left the church, her mind spinning with impossible thoughts. The paper in her hands was real. She could feel the slight roughness of the pencil marks, could see the way 8-year-old Katie had pressed down hard when writing the letter K in her name. But how? How could a piece of paper that Katie had written 21 years ago end up in a church Bible in a town 200 miles from where they had lived? And why now? Why today, when two girls who looked remarkably like what Katie and Amy might look like as teenagers had just walked into her church? Linda sat alone in the empty church, holding the piece of paper and trying to convince herself that she wasn't losing her mind. But deep in her heart, a voice was telling her that this wasn't a coincidence. This was the sign she had been praying for all these years. The truth was finally beginning to come to light. Linda sat in that empty church pew for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. She kept staring at the piece of paper in her hands, reading Katie's careful handwriting over and over again. The church had grown quiet except for the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Finally, she stood up on shaky legs and walked to Pastor Williams's office. She found him there, organizing papers for next week's bulletin. "Pastor Williams," Linda said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I need to show you something." He looked up and immediately saw the distress on her face. "Linda, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Linda said, sitting down across from his desk. With trembling hands, she showed him the piece of paper. "I found this in the church Bible just now. This is my daughter Katie's handwriting." Pastor Williams took the paper and examined it carefully. He had heard Linda's story many times over the past year, and he knew how much her missing daughters meant to her. "Linda," he said gently, "are you certain this is Katie's writing? Sometimes when we want something so badly, our minds can play tricks on us." "I taught her to write," Linda said firmly. "I helped her practice her letters every single night. Look at the way she makes her K. She always pressed down too hard with the pencil. And see how she dots her I? She always made the dots look like little circles instead of points." Pastor Williams studied the paper more closely. Even he could see that this was clearly a child's handwriting, and the paper looked old and worn. "But how would something like this end up in our church Bible?" he asked. "That's what I need to find out," Linda said. "Pastor Williams, I need to ask you about the Robertson family. How long have you known them?" "I just met them today," he replied. "Why do you ask?" Linda took a deep breath. "Because I think those girls might be Katie and Amy." Pastor Williams looked shocked. Linda, that's a very serious accusation. Are you sure you're thinking clearly? The older girl, Jessica, has the same cleft in her chin that Katie had. And Anna has the exact same shade of strawberry blonde hair that Amy had as a child. Plus, they didn't seem to know any of the hymns, which is strange for a family that claims to be regular churchgoers. Linda could see the concern in Pastor Williams's eyes. She knew how this sounded, like a desperate mother grasping at impossible hopes. But she also knew what she had seen. "What do you want to do?" Pastor Williams asked carefully. "I want to talk to them," Linda said. "But I need your help. If I approach them directly, they might run. Can you invite them back for coffee or something? Make it seem casual." Pastor Williams was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the situation. Finally, he nodded. "I'll call them and invite the family back for coffee next Sunday after service. But Linda, you have to promise me you'll be careful. If these aren't your daughters, you could be setting yourself up for heartbreak. And if they are, well, this could be very complicated." The week that followed was the longest of Linda's life. She barely slept, spending most nights staring at Katie's note and trying to figure out how it could have ended up in that Bible. She called. Detective Johnson, who was now retired but still took her calls. "I know it sounds crazy," Linda told him over the phone. "But everything lines up. The timing, their ages, the way they look. And this note, Detective Johnson. There's no way this is a coincidence." "I'll make some calls," Detective Johnson promised. "See what I can find out about this Robertson family. But Linda, please be careful. Don't do anything until we know more." The following Sunday, Linda arrived at church early and sat in her usual pew. She watched nervously as families filed in for the service, and her heart nearly stopped when she saw the Robertsons enter. This time she studied their faces more carefully. Jessica, the older girl, kept looking around nervously, as if she was searching for something or someone. When her eyes met Linda's, there was definitely recognition there. Not the polite acknowledgement of meeting someone new, but the deeper recognition of someone familiar. Anna seemed more relaxed, but Linda noticed that she kept touching a small scar on her left hand. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Amy had fallen off her bike when she was 5 and gotten a cut in exactly that spot that required 3 stitches. During the service, Pastor Williams announced that the Robertson family would be staying for coffee afterward so the congregation could get to know them better. Linda's hands were sweating so much she had to wipe them on her dress. After the service, about 15 people gathered in the church fellowship hall for coffee and cookies. Linda positioned herself across the room from the Robertson family, watching and listening as they answered questions about their background. "We lived in a small town outside Los Angeles," Helen Robertson was saying to Mrs. Garcia. "Robert worked in construction and I stayed home with the girls." "What were their schools like out there?" someone asked. Linda noticed that Helen and Robert exchanged a quick glance before Robert answered. "Oh, we homeschooled the girls mostly. Helen is very good with academics." This raised red flags for Linda. If the girls had been homeschooled their whole lives, why didn't they seem to know basic things that homeschooled children typically learned, like hymns or Bible stories? As the afternoon went on, Linda found opportunities to get closer to Jessica and Anna. She offered them cookies and asked casual questions about their interests. "Do you girls like to read?" Linda asked Anna. "I love reading," Anna replied, and something about her voice made Linda's chest tighten. "Especially stories about families and adventures." "What's your favorite book?" Linda asked. Anna thought for a moment. "I really like this one story about 2 sisters who go on a magical journey. I can't remember the title, but it always made me feel safe somehow." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She had read that exact story to Katie and Amy dozens of times when they were little. It was their absolute favorite bedtime story. "Anna," Linda said quietly, "can I ask you something? Do you ever have dreams about a different life? About people you feel like you should remember but can't quite place?" Anna looked startled by the question. "How did you know?" she whispered. "I have this recurring dream about a woman with brown hair who sings lullabies, And sometimes I dream about a small house with yellow curtains in the kitchen. Linda's heart stopped. Their old house had yellow curtains in the kitchen. She had made them herself from fabric she bought at the discount store. At that moment, Helen Robertson appeared beside them. "Anna, we need to go," she said firmly, her voice tense. "Your father is waiting in the car." "But Mom, I was just talking to—" Anna started to say. "Now, Anna," Helen said, grabbing her daughter's arm a little too tightly. Linda watched as Helen hurried both girls toward the exit. But just before they reached the door, Jessica turned around and looked directly at Linda. "Excuse me, Jessica?" called out, walking back toward Linda while her mother called her name anxiously. "I know this sounds strange, but you seem really familiar to me. Have we met before?" Linda looked into Jessica's blue eyes, Katie's eyes, and felt 21 years of heartache and hope colliding in her chest. "I think we have," Linda said softly. "A long time ago." "Jessica, come on," Helen Robertson called from the doorway, her voice now clearly panicked. But Jessica didn't move. She kept staring at Linda with growing recognition. "You're the lady from my dreams," she whispered. "The one who used to sing to me." At that moment, Helen Robertson rushed back and physically pulled Jessica toward the door. "We have to go right now," she said, but Linda could see tears streaming down her face. Linda followed them outside, her heart pounding. In the parking lot, she saw Robert Robertson loading suitcases into their car, the same suitcases they had brought to church the week before. "Please," Linda called out. "Please don't leave. We need to talk." Helen Robertson turned around, her face filled with anguish. "I'm sorry," she said through her tears. "I'm so sorry. But you don't understand. I saved them. When I found them, they were lost and scared, and no one was looking for them anymore. I never stopped looking," Linda said, walking closer. "Not for a single day in 21 years. Jessica and Anna were standing by the car now, looking confused and frightened. Detective Johnson's police car pulled into the parking lot. Linda had called him that morning just in case. "Mom," Jessica said to Helen Robertson, her voice shaking. "What's happening? Who is this lady?" Linda looked at her daughters who were now grown women, and felt her heart breaking and healing at the same time. "My name is Linda Thompson," she said gently. "And I think I'm your mother."